Focus on Flowers is made possible in part by That's on Grant in Bloomington, offering Cajun food including Creole and jambalaya. Dine in or carry out. Full menu online at datsongrant.net or 812-339-3090. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Today I'm talking with Esther Minnick, who is a master gardener, and she's been gardening in Bloomington for many years. She also is one of the people in charge of the flower show at the Monroe County Fair every year. So she knows a thing or two about flowers. Esther, tell me what you're doing every spring to get ready to have a bonza year in the garden.
Oh, I can't wait for spring.
Spring is your favorite season.
Oh, spring I'm just chomping at the bit to get out there, you know, and I do go out really early. And first warm day that you can go out and you do the walkthrough inspection where you look to see what's coming up, and the little grape hyacinth will be showing their buds, and the first daffodils. There's always a contest at our house to who finds the first daffodil, because there are hundreds of them around the house. One of my first things is to mulch.
Oh, you mulch that early?
Oh, if someone told me years ago to mulch in April before your perennials really came through, it's much easier. You can tell where they're at.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, and it's much easier than when they're big. In the fall, I use all my leaves and mulch with that. And I've noticed that the leaf litter will last until about the end of June. Then it'll get really thin. A trick that we use on our paths and between the perennial vegetables like the tomatoes and the rhubarb is to put down cardboard and then put a layer of mulch on top of it. And it makes the mulch goes much further.
Yes, I suppose it would.
And it's a terrific barrier for weeds.
So that's a really good thing to remember.
And a year later you can just rototill all that in if you want to.
It becomes part of the soil.
Or you can add another layer to it for your paths.
That's a good idea. Where do you get your cardboard?
Oh, just go down to the recycling center and open the trunk of your car. They'll even put it in for you.
Well, that sounds like an economical way to get it.
Yeah, one thing I would suggest if you do use, the cardboard's much easier to put down than newspaper, because you know, many times you'll put newspaper down, but it doesn't blow.
No. You have to wet the newspaper.
Yes.
You don't have to wet the cardboard?
No.
I see.
You need to watch for that plastic tape, because some of the boxes will have plastic tape, but the printing on those boxes is from soy.
Soybeans.
So
it's organic.
It's organic.
Ah, so that's an extra bonus.
Yes, just watch for the plastic tape and you can pull it off, or some of the grocery stores will give you their produce boxes, which have no tape on them, and they're really excellent.
So that's what you do every spring. And then what do you do next?
Oh gosh, then I shop. I mean, my middle son, Ben, told me one day that said, we shouldn't let you out in the car in April. Because I open the trunk and there it's full of plants. I mean, they're just wonderful places, and our farmer's market is excellent to go to.
There are some good plants for sale at the market.
Great plants at the market. The department stores, our hardware stores, everyone in Bloomington has terrific plants.
That's right. And then you buy a lot of plants and then you've got to plant them. Do you have any little tricks? Like, do you put any fertilizer in the hole, like any amendment in the soil before you plant or anything like that?
Well, I live on a farmette. It's not a true farm, but we have stalled horses. And there's piles of manure of old bedding too, the old bedding. And after it's been laying in the field or piled up around the barn for a year or two, it's just excellent for compost.
So aged manure has to be aged.
Very aged.
Get it from a farm.
There's some things you do not ever use manure on. To my chagrin, I have learned this. One is tulips.
Tulips don't like it.
They're very offended at any type of manure.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that, but I'll remember.
Daffodils tolerate it quite well. Daffodils seem to be a better choice for me than tulips.
Well, the deer don't eat
they love tulips.
the daffodils, but they love tulips. Yeah. Well, you've given us some really good tips. I can't wait to get out into the spring garden.
Oh, me neither.
I'm speaking today with Anita Brancalenti, who is a garden designer, and she has just won a national award for the garden she designed here in Bloomington on Sheridan Drive, which is owned by John Lee Andrews and Dan Smith. And Anita, we'd like you to tell us, if you can, how you go about starting a garden design and what considerations there are for the designer.
Well, I think the first thing that we do is we look at the architecture of the house or the building, and then secondly, of course, we look at the site itself. On this particular project, the site is very asymmetrical, and it flanks two streets, First Street and Sheridan. So looking at those two things, the house itself is somewhat in an arts and craft or prairie style, even with a hats off a little bit to Japanese arts and craft with the roof line and that sort of thing. So using the style of the house, this rather elongated piece of property, I wanted to use plantings that were very native on the street side with grasses and our native trees and shrubs, and to develop the plan on the inside with plants that are our basic garden varieties and many cultivars that come from Japan. So I wanted to use both North American and Japanese plants in it.
Well, that was interesting. That was very clever. And then you've got a public view of the garden and a more private view from the
inside
house.
Right.
Yes.
And as we move around the house, we tried to get a view of the garden from every window, and every window shows a different view.
That must be really very nice for the owners.
Yes, actually, the few times that I've been in the house and I look out, I'm rather surprised myself to see what the view is like. As we move around to the back side of the house, the backyard, the yard kind of goes up on an embankment. And so it made for a great opportunity to show off plants, essentially, on this embankment, kind of tumbling down, you know, to the lawn. And it's a wonderful view from inside. And as we continue along the grass path, we come to a pergola. We have grapevines on that. And it's a wonderful place to stop and look at the garden, both looking back at this embankment and then looking down 2 steps into the lower part of the backyard.
So a designer has to think of different perspectives that people may be seeing the garden from.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. And I think that particular garden has a lot of different layers and different perspectives depending on where you stand. It's not real flat or one-dimensional in that respect.
So that gives you lots of opportunities.
Oh, it certainly does, yes.
And do you have any little places in the garden where no one else sees the plantings except the owners?
Yes, I think once you pass under the pergola, that becomes a very private area, and it's a little special. It's around, they have a screen house, not attached to the house, you know, that's kind of set into the garden. And that can't be seen from the street. And we have another embankment planting where the plants and the colors are very different than on the other side of the pergola. And then if we go past the screen house and we go down 2 more steps, we come to a lower garden, which is actually a vegetable garden.
Oh, how nice. It's a very versatile
space.
Yes.
It is, yes. And it's, they're raised beds. It was kind of laid out in a cuneiform plan with limestone walls, and it's easy for planting. I like planting it because I don't have to get down on my knees.
Yes.
And so it's really comfortable. And then at the very last part of the garden, we go around to this little corner of between the house and the garage, and it becomes another little private space.
Oh, well, it sounds like there are some little garden rooms.
Yes, there are garden rooms for
Even
sure.
though there are no hedges,
That's
or
right.
walls, there are still defined spaces.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Well, it sounds like a lovely garden, and of course I've seen it, so I know it is a beautiful garden, but congratulations on winning this national award from the Perennial Plant Association.
Thank you.
Today I'm talking with Jillian Harris, who is a botanical artist, and we've been discussing shrubs that are good to grow in the garden, not only because they're beautiful, but because they are part of a complex ecosystem. Jillian, I always get mixed up about what to call plants that are not natives. What are some of the words that are used for plants that are not native to the United States?
Exotics, sometimes cultivars, although there can be cultivars of natives. Not all non-native species are invasive, but some certainly are if they don't have their predators and pests that they have back in their country of origin. They can really spread and take over a garden to the detriment of all the other plants growing around them.
I see. So there are native plants, and then there are non-native plants. And underneath the heading of non-native plants, there are invasive species that come from other countries and have no known enemies here, so they just take over our areas.
Yes, they can. Like the Asian honeysuckle is a prime example of.
Kudzu is a prime example.
That's a horrible example, yeah. But they also, their growing season isn't synced to ours. So if you look at a native woodland in winter and you see lots of green shrubbery, although the trees have lost their leaves, those are probably all honeysuckles. And that's how they get a head start over our native plants, by retaining their foliage longer into the cold season and acquiring it sooner in the spring.
So then they creep over more ground,
yes,
make more headway than the native species.
Yeah, the natives just can't compete with them. They're much more aggressive that way.
And another reason why invasive species that are imported have a better time of it is because they have no known predators here, such as insects that eat their leaves.
Many times, yeah. Nothing to keep them in check. So what they do is then spread and create a monoculture of themselves, and they really decrease the diversity in an environment, and that's what we really are going for in any environment or garden, is a diversity of plant species.
So we want a diverse collection of plants in our garden. We like a lot of natives because they are important to maintaining the integrity of the ecosystem. But there are some imported plants that are not invasive and that we've had for years in our gardens, things like lilacs and roses. They're not natives, but they're benign aliens.
Yes, except for multiflora rose, which was intentionally planted for wildlife and is now everywhere.
That's invasive.
That's generally not grown in a garden, though.
But I notice in the catalogs when they're introducing a new shrub, they will say specially floriferous, or big showy blossoms, or no local pests. Now, some of these are benign natives. They're not going to get out of bounds or take over our native woodlands. They're well behaved. But we wouldn't want to have a whole garden solely of those benign natives, would we?
No, and also it's good to have some for their floriferous qualities. We all love beautiful flowers, but you also have to take into account the foliage, which certain native larvae depend on. So we have moths and caterpillars and insects for the birds to feed on then, and also fruits and seeds and nuts for wildlife if we're interested in attracting them and maintaining a healthy ecosystem in that way.
So there's lots of different things to think about when you're planting a garden. And usually, as Jillian said, we want diversity. We want some native species so that the caterpillars that are going to turn into butterflies have something to munch on, because they can't munch on the on the leaves of non-native species?
Usually not.
Usually not.
Yeah.
And yet we like some of these imported shrubs, such as lilacs and roses and rhododendrons, though there are some local native
Yes,
rhododendrons.
they're not so native to Indiana, but certainly to.
Right. But what we're aiming for in a well-appointed garden, and one that is a responsible garden, is diversity. We want a mix of imported species that are not invasive and native species that will nourish the wildlife that depend on them. So, in planting a garden, try to have a diverse set of plantings. Is that
right.
kind of it in a nutshell?
Yes, each garden can be a microcosm of the environment, and if we have enough gardens linked up, then that'll vastly improve our surroundings. When in the middle of suburban development and so forth, we're losing so much.
Okay. I'm speaking with Tom Hollingsworth. He and his wife Beth have one of the most charming gardens in Bloomington, and their garden was on the 2012
Yes.
Garden Walk.
Yes.
And I saw wonderful bird feeders. And could you tell us a little bit about how you managed to get them right up in the trees?
Well, they're up there with pulleys and hooks,
Ooh.
and all of those are available at your local hardware store. The local ones, and I suppose the box stores would have them also. I have gone the range from cotton rope to nylon to metal clad or plastic clad metal rope. The heavier ones need that. And my rule is do not climb ladders. So you want to hook those up there. If you have tree work done, that's an ideal time to have the treeman put those hooks up for you. And otherwise, I put them up with a pole and a little bit of masking tape to hold the hook on there until you get it over the limb.
And you throw it over the limb?
No, I usually on the pole.
On the pole, and it's the pole that...
Put it up there and then yank the pole off and tears the masking tape. You also put very much on there, of course. And they'll stay up there and then get everything hooked up, pull it up. So we have multiple of those and all sorts of different bird feeders. I don't have anything. I've used all kinds.
And did the squirrels leave them alone when they're up high?
If they're up high and out of the way, away from the trunk of the tree, they'll try.
I see.
They'll do their best. They are acrobats. They will do their best, and I figured that's part of bird feeding is to feed the squirrels.
And you get a really good show when you look up and you can see the birds and the squirrels all at once.
Yes, they're all at work for it, and it's always fun.
Well, I'm always amazed at how much wildlife there is in your garden. What do you plant in the spring to make sure that you've got the right flowers for the...
Well, one, we have mostly perennials that will attract the birds, butterflies, the grasses in the back, the Budadelia, even the cardinal plant is a perennial.
Red flowers for the hummingbirds.
Yes, and we have several vines that have very pretty red flowers, and I've noticed hummingbirds coming to those.
And they're like tubular
yes, that's
flowers.
right. And we will put out in the springtime the hummingbird feeders, and the formula is, 3-to-1. 3 parts water, 1 part sugar, and you can make that up.
And so you get a lot of hummingbirds,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Very important if you have those left over from last year that you bleach those out and wash them very well. You don't want to put bleach up for the birds, but to
Clean
make sure
them, really make sure
clean
there's no
them very well,
bacteria.
because they're going to sit in your garage someplace over the winter, and you don't want to have any of that
so
stuff.
spring cleaning for
Yes,
the
right.
feeders, and then planting a lot of flowering, showy flowering plants.
We're fortunate that we have a sort of a plant room. We can bring things out when the frost is no longer a problem. But even that is the old adage in Indiana was Mother's Day.
It was when you could plant.
Right, when you could plant. And so we'll bring those out.
And spring is such a wonderful season.
Right.
I'm speaking today with Kim Patton, and Kim's garden was on the 2012 Bloomington Garden Walk. The garden is about 9 years old, and you started it right after you built your house, I believe.
Yes. We built a house, the first house that we have built, and it didn't include any landscaping. And I knew that I just wanted to kind of have a go at it and do it on my own, kind of being mindful that I had to start with small plants. I couldn't start with huge plants. There was a budget and a lot of space to cover. But it just sort of evolved over 9 years.
Well, it's a credit to you because you've absolutely created a magical garden.
Thank you.
Were there some challenges, 4-footed challenges too?
Yes. It's a heavily wooded property, and there are a lot of deer. A lot of deer. One day, outside of my kitchen window, there were 17 at one time.
Oh my goodness.
It's a herd. It is a herd. They are...
And it's a hazard for young children and animals too, to have
Correct.
that many.
When we first, 9 years ago, I used to be able to stomp my feet and clap my hands and they would scatter. And now they're very tame, almost to the point of being aggressive.
And it's a little scary. That plus the threat of Lyme disease from the ticks.
Correct. I got Lyme disease.
Did you really?
I know firsthand.
Oh my goodness.
I had had so many tick bites in building the gardens, mainly the back woodland garden.
Where there were large numbers of deer. Well, that is really a health hazard. So what did you do to try to discourage the deer?
I studied a lot on deer behavior. And deer actually are somewhat trainable. They have a very clear route that you can kind of even get to know the family groups. They go one direction in the morning, and in the evening they go the other direction. And so you can kind of predict what they want to do. So my objective was to try to just steer them around the perimeter and keep them out of the main part of the yard. And in my front garden, there's no fencing or anything there, so that's pretty high maintenance. I try to plant things that are at least not their favorites, and do all the tricks in the book with the sprays and the soap and all that sort of stuff. And that's effective up to a point. You'll have one bad night where it's just totally been raided. The back woodland garden, I knew was going to be too much of a challenge. They're just too many, and it's where they want to be. And we decided to put up an electric fence back there, which has worked very well.
And was this a special design that you worked out?
This last year is a whole new design, which has turned out to be a win-win. It's much more attractive,
good.
And it's much more effective.
Well, tell me how you did it.
It is a product that is a woven, braided electric rope that I was able to order in black, so it's not visible, or it's not very visible. And then we used treated 4x4 wood post set in the ground in concrete, and we drilled holes through those posts and ran this wire through the post, and bought an inexpensive charger that we have an underground line buried from the garden to the back patio where it just plugs in, and whenever we're working out there we just unplug it, and it's not, I know a lot of people are pretty frightened by electric fences, but it depends on the charger you use. My husband, in fact, has touched this one 3 times personally, it would not take me 3 times. I would have learned quickly after one, and I've never touched it. And he is here to still talk about it. It's not, so it's a very weak charge. And it doesn't feel good, but it doesn't knock you over, and it's not going to injure you. So if it doesn't injure him, it's not going to injure the deer.
No, so it's not something that is terribly painful for the deer.
No, and just to be responsible for anyone else that we always know if there's going to be a workman in our yard, and we always arrange to have it turned off. And other than that, it's a very, very private yard. There are no people. No,
because you're out of the city. Well, that sounds wonderful. And how effective is it?
100%.
100%.
We have not had a deer raid this last year.
That is good news indeed. Thanks for sharing.
Yes.